Hey, welcome back. I am your host, Robert Moore. So glad you guys could tune in today. Look forward to another great conversation and stories with you all. So glad that you guys could find time to just come back into the room and sit down, find a nice, comfortable chair, and get ready for another great episode. I'm excited to introduce a gentleman who I have heard his story, who I was truly impacted not only by his story, but what he continues to do with his life and how he follows God in so many different ways, listening to him and understanding what direction God was taking him in his life. He's the executive director of T Factor, which is Coca-Cola Consolidated Incorporated. And I'm happy to introduce a good friend, Mark Whitacre, to the show today. Hey, how you doing today, Mark?
Good, Robert. Thank you for having me. Look forward to sharing here today.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm so glad that not only we could connect this and bring this together and find the time for me to be able to sit down with you in this nice facility we're in, but more importantly, allow my listeners to really get to know you and hear your story and about how God has used you in so many different ways. So I'll start off by letting you maybe introduce yourself a little bit more and tell people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I grew up north of Cincinnati, a little town called Marr, Ohio, about 1,000 people in that town. My mom still lives in that area today. She's almost 90 years old, still live there. And my dad was born and raised there and passed away a couple years ago at 90. They were 66 years married and wonderful childhood. And met my wife when I was in seventh grade. She was in she was seventh grade. I was in eighth grade.
In seventh grade,
junior high.
Wow.
She was 13. I was 14. Went to our high school proms together, and I was a gifted student. I was senior class president of my class. Just 180 students in my class. And,
right.
We were the homecoming king and queen. In school, and at that point, I had the right moral compass during my childhood. Like I said, wonderful parents, but somewhere when I got in my early 30s, I kind of lost that moral compass. I really became a selfish leader and got caught up in myself. And only child out of four to go to college. And got bachelor's and master's from Ohio State University, PhD from an Ivy League university, Cornell University, New York, PhD in biochemistry, 8 years of college, only child to go to college at all. Went 8 years, bachelor's, master's, PhD. My parents said I went and got a degree for all the family for the rest of the
I was about to say 8 years and you accomplished a lot.
It was full scholarship,
nice.
8 years, and all you learn when you're in an Ivy League school, at least all I was hearing, you're going to make millions of dollars with this Ivy League education, and that's all I was hearing during that time. And so therefore that's what I wanted, to get a position where I was making millions of dollars. And by the time I was 32, and I got caught up in the world.
Okay, so wait, so you're telling me at 32, you were already making millions of dollars by 32? Wow. Okay. Yeah. There's so many people that normally they have that vision or they have that goal to come out and with a successful degree, I plan to make. And so wow, that's really impressive. And so where did that take you? What were you doing at that time?
Having a PhD in biochemistry, and I graduated in 1983 when the biotech industry was exploding. Genentech was starting, and Hoffman the Roach, and pharmaceutical industry, and I mean the job market for when someone was coming out at age 25, I was with a PhD in biochemistry. I mean, they were giving you company cars and moving you, and you were buying large homes. So by the time I was 32, I was divisional president of the biotech division of ADM Archer-Daniels Midland, the 56th largest company on the Fortune 500.
Wow.
$70 billion in revenue. So I mean, you're talking something that's 10 times the size of a Coca-Cola Consolidated. $70 billion in revenue, 30,000 employees, so double the number of employees. Coca-Cola Consolidated about 17,000. But 1989, I was out of 30,000 employees, I was number 4 ranked executive at that time. At 32, we had a 75-year-old CEO at ADM, Archer-Daniels Midland, a 69-year-old president, and I was 32.
Wow.
The 7 top executives each had their access to a corporate jet. Each had their own jet. the 7 top execs. So I had my own jet. I bought the CEO's home. He was 75, wanted to move to a smaller home at 75. So I bought his home my first month working there. He gave me a startup bonus to buy his home, to be the down payment for his home.
Wow.
And it's a 13,000 square foot house with an 8-car garage. And I was earning, with bonuses and stock options, it was $2 or $3 million a year in 1989, and I worked there for 8 years.
Wow.
$2 or $3 million a year.
So
I lived in a home with a 8-car garage, Ferrari, 2 BMWs, 2 Mercedes. Probably the best way, the most blunt way to explain it, I was Justin Bieber before Justin Bieber.
Okay, so wait. You know, it's funny you say that, because normally in most cases, when a person hears something like that, they're like, wait a minute, I need that. How did you get there? What was your strategy, or what did you do to make it there? Because normally, I mean, I would say nowadays, a lot of people at 30 something, they're normally sometimes a lot of us are just warming up. A lot of us are just kind of figuring it out. Even though we may have a degree in a certain topic, we're just kind of maybe just working our way into our career and just getting warmed up. So a lot of people would have looked at your success story like, okay, you've got to write an infomercial. You got to tell me how I can get from this point to that point by 30. And I mean, I think that's what culture has kind of showed us, that, yeah, that's what we inspire to have. So of course, now what happened with all that? How did it plan out for you?
For sure, that's what I did want at that time. I mean, I finished Cornell at, like I said, at 25. And 25 is a young PhD. When I was 22 as a PhD student, the average age at Cornell was 32. Mm-hmm. So I was 10 years younger than the other PhD students, especially in the sciences, to be a PhD in biochemistry at an Ivy League university.
Right.
I was 10 years younger than most. But I tell you, during that time, Robert, I grew up Christian parents. Mm-hmm. I would say I went to church as a child. I wouldn't say I was a Christian. Went to church because they forced me to go to church, and they forced me to read the Bible.
Right.
But being in the physics club at high school, and especially 8 years at Ohio State and Cornell at secular universities, I actually had PhD scientists, professors, that were saying, if you're a Christian, you can't be in my class.
Oh, wow.
If you're a Christian, you can't be a PhD scientist. So by the time I'm 22, first year student as a PhD student, finished at 25 at Cornell. By the time I'm 22, I'm actually thinking, are my parents Christians because they didn't go to college? Because I have scientists, some of them that are up for Nobel Prizes at Cornell, that's saying, if you're a Christian, you can't be a scientist. If you're a Christian, you can't be in my class. So I really started, by the time I'm 22, I'm thinking my parents are Christians because they didn't go to college. That's what I'm thinking at 25.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm an atheist at that point.
Okay.
Thinking that at that time, I'd never met a PhD scientist that believed in God during that stage of my life.
That's interesting, because I guess at that point, if it's almost like somebody telling you that if you want to go in this direction, you have to align with what everybody in this direction is doing. And so many of us, sometimes we get caught up in that, and that, okay, well, if this is what you're telling me I have to do, then I guess I'll conform to this instead of like what others are doing. Well, I'm just curious.
I did conform.
So what did your parents think about that when you went that direction?
They were heartbroken, and they just kept praying for me. And I didn't tell them that bluntly. Said, well, they only believe in God because they didn't go to college.
Right.
I didn't tell them that, but that's what I was thinking in my mind at that point. But that also at an Ivy League school, all you hear is it's all about becoming CEOs of the largest companies, of the Fortune 500 companies, and becoming a millionaire at a very young age. I mean, I was hearing this all during my university days. And so I wanted to become that. I wanted to become a millionaire before I was 30. And by the time I was 32, I was there. I lived in a mansion. I bought the CEO's home. And this isn't just for a week or two. This is for 8 years. I had that lifestyle for 8 years.
Wow.
And I bought the CEO's home, and I was making $2 or $3 million a year with my bonus. I was divisional president of the biotech division at ADM. Ethanol, largest producer of ethanol in the world.
Yeah, no.
We had 70% of the world ethanol was in a product in my division.
Wow.
And citric acid that goes into beverages and lactate. I mean, this is a several $1 billion a year revenue, a division I was president of, and I was corporate vice president also of the whole company. So I was ranked number 4 executive out of 30,000 employees at age 32. I was ranked number 4. I had my own plane, lived in a mansion, and I got obsessed.
Wow. Yeah. No.
It became like an addiction.
Right. Right. I mean, honestly, it was almost like it. I guess you could say that became normal to you. And now at this point, it's like, yeah, no, I can't imagine myself doing anything or living any other way. I mean, it did.
It became normal. It's what I went to school for. It's what I got educated for. Everything they said that I was going to obtain after getting a PhD from Cornell, I was giddy.
Right.
They said you're going to become a top executive in one of the biggest companies in the world, and it was happening.
Right.
7 years. I graduated at 25. I'm 32 now. 7 years after I graduated from Cornell, everything they told me was going to happen was happening.
Right, right.
And I thought, this is it. And I
that's
thought,
remarkable.
if there is a heaven, this is it.
Right,
is what I thought.
Right, literally. I mean, because you're right. Most people normally don't get to experience anything like that. I mean, and I can only think about from the time I graduated college, it was almost like a fight to figure out what I'm going to do with this degree. I got a great piece of paper now. I got an expensive piece of paper. Who's going to take me? Where am I going to go with that? Where does my life pan out? And of course, it definitely didn't pan out where I owned a jet, a multi-million-dollar house, but it led me exactly where I needed to go. So where did that all eventually, when you had reached and achieved everything, and I'm sure a lot of people looked up to you, especially at your age in that time, what path did that eventually lead you to? I know where you're at now, but how did that play out for you eventually?
I tell you where it led me to is this. I kept thinking, I'm driving a Ferrari, making $300,000 or $400,000 a month in bonuses, and that's 1989. So I mean, you look at $2 or $3 million a year that I was making for 8 years, depending on the amount of bonuses that I made that year.
Right.
So it always ranged kind of $2 to $3 million, depending on the performance of the company that year, because our bonuses were based also on performance of the company, our own personal performance in the company. So everything I was told at Cornell that's going to happen was happening. Living in a mansion. I bought the home that our CEO had lived in. He became 75, wanted to move to a smaller home. It was the original house that John Daniels, the founder of Archer Daniels Midland, lived in, that started ADM 115 years ago. It was built in 1846, the home. Gorbachev had visited that home. Mother Teresa had visited this home. I mean, it was a historical site in Illinois. That was the home I lived in for 8 years. And I bought that home my first month. Starting at ADM, I bought the
That's pretty impressive.
With the startup bonus he gave me to work there, at ADM, I bought that home, and it was my first month. So my first couple weeks, I had a company plane given to me to use the 8 years that I was there.
Right.
The first month, I bought the home of the founder.
I mean, you were literally a rock star
really
at that time.
And I felt like a rock. I said, look out, Bon Jovi, here I come. I mean, that's really how I felt. So the whole time I'm getting obsessed to power and greed in corporate America. And this is an example of corporate leadership that we're talking, a really example of selfish leadership that we're talking about now. It's not an example of servant leadership. We're talking about selfish leadership, all about, because the 3 guys that were above me at the company we were selfish leaders. It was all about us. It was all about how much can we earn and how to make more money. And so the whole time I'm getting obsessed to that lifestyle, almost like an addiction. My wife became a Christian at age 30, 10 years before me. So she's a Christian during this time.
Did you know that? Did she?
She shared it. She's going to Bible study, and she's forced me to go to church just like my parents did. So I'm going to church with her, but it's one ear out the other. I'm not listening to her. And my kids were in church, and I'm not listening. I'm thinking what I need to do on Monday to get the next big bonus to buy the next car. The Ferrari wasn't good enough. And I think that's what I learned is I felt like there had to be more to life than this.
Right.
Because I'd buy that new car, then I have 8 cars in that car garage.
Right.
And Ginger's driving a 10-year-old Wrangler Jeep, and I'm driving around a Ferrari, and I had to think there's got to be more to life than this. I mean, there was something that was missing, because with each big bonus, with the corporate plane I had, with the mansion we lived in. That's great for a few months.
Right.
But I'm thinking, what's next? And I
Right.
think, Robert, I could have got to the level of Bill Gates. And I would say, there's got to be more to life
Right.
than this. It wasn't enough. There was a void
No,
that was there. And I'm watching
been
my
there.
wife that's driving this 10-year-old Wrangler, and I'd buy her whatever car she wanted.
Right.
And she said, no, her car's fine. And I'm thinking, how is she so content
Right.
with what she has? And I'm not even content with a Ferrari, a Falcon 50, and living in a 13,000 square foot mansion
Wow.
with horse riding stables that our kids would ride in an inside arena during the winter time that was heated.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
think, this is not enough. And I'm thinking, what is up here? And I was really exploring and really seeking. There's got to be more to life than this. Is the stage I was at.
Right.
Because if you're looking just for materialism, at some point it's never enough.
Right.
It's never enough. And that void was never being filled with money and materialism.
So, I mean, you say it's never enough because there's so many people that would probably disagree with you and say, well, yeah, but I mean, if you give me the money, I'm sure it would be enough. I mean, I would find happiness in all of that. I mean,
I thought that too.
Okay.
You don't find it. It's not there. That happiness is not there. So I'm there a couple years doing that now. A couple years, continue to get promotions, continue to get larger bonuses. And my wife is totally satisfied and totally content. And I'm watching this. I'm watching this play out. That none of this meant anything to her. Matter of fact, she was embarrassed of the cars. And if I had them in the driveway, she'd say, do you mind putting them in the garage? She was embarrassed. And I had these big gates that close, automatic gates in the house. I mean, this was a mansion.
Right.
And she would say, would you mind putting the cars in the garage? They were embarrassing to her. And after a couple of years there, I started sharing with her what was going on in the company, because they started bringing me into an international cartel, a price fixing scheme, because after a couple of years there, our CEO's now 77.
Right.
Our president's now 71, no longer 69. And I'm 34 then.
And
And number 4 ranked executive. So they had to pour into me. They were grooming me to replace the CEO, and there was another executive 10 years older than me. They were preparing to be the CEO. So we're being prepared to be this, and it was even in Fortune magazine that we were being groomed to be the next CEO and COO, and myself.
Right.
So I was being groomed to go from divisional president to company president. So they started bringing me in and grooming me about this price fixing scheme, this international cartel. And I started sharing with my wife, who's now a Christian. And she said, Mark, is that legal? And I said, Ginger, it's not legal, but everybody does it. And if I'm going to continue to move up the corporate ladder, I have to do this. I mean, if we're going to continue to do this, and our kids being in private schools and we're living in a mansion, this is what I have to do. And she said, Mark, I'd rather have a 2,000 square foot house and a Ford in the driveway instead of you with a Ferrari and a mansion. She said, I really want my husband back. That's what I want. And I said, well, Ginger, but look what we have. I mean, we can do anything we want to do by having this position in the company. And I shared with her, and she said, you know what, Mark? She said, that sounds illegal, what you're doing. And I said, well, this price fixing scheme that they're training me to do, it is illegal, but everybody does it. If you're in a commodity business, they tell me this is what you have to do
Right.
to be in a commodity business. And
Right.
they told me they've been doing it for 12 years. So this is what we have to do.
Okay.
And she said, well, who pays? How much does the company earn? I said, well, the company earns about $1 billion a year. $1 billion, not $1 million
Right.
dollars profit extra for doing this. And she said, well, who pays for it? And I said, well, the consumers pay for it. When they buy $50 worth of groceries, they pay $4 or $5 extra. That's all. $4 or $5 out of $50 groceries from the price fixing scheme that's ongoing. And I never forget, she said, you mean my grandma on $200 a week, Social Security, $800 a month, is paying this, and her biggest bill is a grocery bill? And I said, it's only $4 or $5, Ginger, a week. That's it. And she said, Mark, we're ripping off every consumer in the world, because ADM's the largest food additive company in the world, it's ripping off every consumer. She said, I don't know if can live with this. And she said she's going to pray about it. And we talk about it a few hours later. She prayed about it for a couple hours. The day that I told her that I'm being groomed to take over this international cartel, that our 77-year-old CEO and our 72-year-old president are leading, that I'm being groomed to take it over. And she came back a few hours later and she said, Mark, I prayed about it. You've got to turn yourself in to the FBI. She said, God's led me to this. This is a fraud. It's illegal. And it's ripping off every consumer in the marketplace, in the world. And she said, you've got to expose it. That's the right thing to do.
But you hadn't started in that position quite yet, right?
I wasn't COO, but they were already grooming. They were 7 months into mentoring me to eventually take it over. So I'm 7 months being trained how to take over this international cartel, this price fixing scheme. So I'm in it. I'm 7 months in it by the time I shared it with her.
Yeah.
I'm being groomed to take over the price fixing case, where we get together with the competitors. You're supposed to be competing with your competitors. That's what capitalism's all about. But in this case, I'm working with our competitors, and they've been doing it for 12 years, but they're already mentoring me
to kind of almost
take over this
collectively drive the price up a tad bit. And it's not that you're competing against them, but you're more so all working together to bring the price up on things that way.
Illegally.
Wow.
It's collusion. It's illegal.
Wow.
And she didn't like it, and she wasn't going to live with it. And she put her foot down. She said, we're either going to expose it. She said, we're going to expose it. We're going to do it today. Yeah.
So I'm curious, where did it go from there?
We talked for hours. This was November 5th, 92. I'm 34 years old then, 2 years with the company, because they saw me as family. So they start bringing me in to what's going on behind the curtains. And she's 33, I'm 34. And she put her foot down. She said, we're going to turn it in. We're going to do it today. And she said, Mark, I'd rather be homeless. I'll never forget this comment. She said she'd rather be homeless than live in a house where illegal activity is occurring. That she'd rather be homeless.
Wow.
So the mansion meant nothing to her. The 8 cars, it meant nothing. She wanted to do the right thing.
Wow. And I'm sure you probably didn't agree with her on that.
I didn't. And she said, Mark, we're going to do it. We're going to do it today. And if I don't do it, she's turning me in. She's going to expose the case, and it's going to happen today.
Wow. Now, so I'm just trying to understand your mindset at that moment when she said that if you weren't going to do it, she was going to turn you in. I mean, how does that make you feel when you feel like, okay, as my partner in life, you're supposed to be as some people like to say, you're my partner in crime as well, but you're not agreeing with this now. What is that? I mean, like, how did that play out? How did that feel to just realize, oh, wow. Okay.
Well, I've known her since she was 13.
Yeah, no, true.
And I know when she makes a decision that she met it. And I knew at that point that we are going to be exposing this case to the federal authorities today. And I knew there's no doubt about it. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen today. Because I knew when Ginger had her mind on it, and especially since she's been a Christian, and that God led her to do it, I knew it was going to happen.
Wow.
Yeah. So and it was a nerve-wracking, it was a tough day. A tough day.
Wow.
But I also knew that I was telling her for a reason, and I knew it was the right thing to do. I felt almost relieved to tell Ginger that day. Felt almost relieved because we're already a successful company. And it made no sense to do fraud. We were a successful company, and we were successful executives. I mean, at some point, when's it not enough? That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's true.
So I felt relieved to tell her. But I didn't like the idea about telling the FBI, the federal authorities.
So did you end up telling the federal?
We did. We told that very day, because she was adamant. We're going to do it. We're going to do it today. Because if you think about it for a week or two, we're going to talk herself out of it. It's the right thing to do. She prayed about it for a couple hours, and God led her that we need to do it. We need to do it today. And we did. We told the authorities. And she sat with me by my side for 4 hours when we told the FBI.
Wow.
And it was one of the most nerve-wracking days in my life when you're telling the FBI that you're involved in a crime that's stealing $1 billion a year from the consumers.
Wow. I could only imagine. I mean, normally most people don't sit down with the FBI until they've been caught. So now I have to talk to you. Most people don't think, well, let me just go and volunteer let me go in and talk to them about the situation. So how did that end up playing out?
Well, we talked for 4 hours, and when they would ask certain tough questions, Ginger was by my side, and she would answer some of those questions. Like the FBI would say, well, Mark, how much money's involved? And I said, well, you guys got a lot of important things to do. You got drug dealers in Illinois and all these things, and I would stall, and Ginger would say, he told me a couple hours ago it's $1 billion theft. She would share the truth when I couldn't get it.
Right.
When I couldn't share it with the FBI, she would share it. She said, this is a case that involves $1 billion theft, and it's been going on for 12 years. She shared everything that I shared with her over those few hours that same day.
And this had been going on not only with your company, but other companies that were involved as well.
Yes. When price fixing involves, you're working with your competitors. Right. Instead of competing with them, you're
all pushing the price up
together.
So
it was several different companies.
Wow. So how did that end up playing out? You know, because I mean, I know at this point you have made it to a point where, like you said, I mean, you're living like a rock star. You got 1,300 square foot mansion. You got cars. Was
13,000 square feet.
13,000. Yes. Let me not get that wrong. But so at what point, like, how did that play out with you going to the authorities instead of them finding out about it and coming to you? I mean, and I just because a lot of times we may hear about stories, we may see different things, and sometimes a lot of people assume, okay, well, when you go and you work with the authorities to expose something, that completely clears you of all the negative that could follow you as far as what could happen because of you exposing the situation. So how did that end up playing out?
Well, we ended up sharing with the FBI. We did it that day, the very day that I told Ginger. Mm-hmm. And we shared for 4 hours. And the FBI gave me a choice that day. Ginger acted like my lawyer. She said, okay, we can go home now, right? My husband came and did the right thing. Mm-hmm. He's only involved 7 months. It's been going on 12 years. It's even been going on to decading before he even joined the company. Mm. And they gave a choice. They said, look, Ginger, your husband just confessed to a $1 billion crime that's been going on for 12 years. We either have to arrest him today or he has to become an informant tomorrow and to go after the kingpins that's training him and mentoring him how to do this. And so that's the choice I had that day. She thought when we went in and did this that they would tap phones and do whatever the FBI does.
And just not involve you.
They relied on me for the evidence. So I met the FBI at 6 o'clock the following morning. They shaved my chest. They put microphones to my chest. They put a tape recorder on my back. They had another tape recorder in a briefcase and a third tape recorder in a notebook. So 3 different tape recorders to make sure they captured,
right,
in case one wasn't working. And I got wired up at 6 o'clock every morning, Monday through Friday for 3 years. I wore a wire 8, 9, 10 hours a day, depending on how many hours I was at work.
Right.
8, 9, 10 hours a day. I wore a wire every day, Monday through Friday for 3 years.
Wow. Oh, my
From 1992
goodness.
to 1995.
Wow, that's a serious commitment to that's a lot. Was there any point where you just kind of said to them, okay, like, I feel like you've got enough from me. Like, what more do I have to do? I mean,
multiple times I did. And then what would happen, and the reason why the case would take so long, 3 years, when the co-defendants that I'm taping, mm-hmm. when they would start, someone would say, hey, we've been doing that for citric acid and we make $250 million a year on that. So it became 11 different cases Because of them bragging about their illegal activity,
Right.
the others around me, the co-defendants,
Right.
it became 11 different cases over time, and that's why the case took so long. Because once they got evidence on a new case, they wanted me to start asking questions on that one. So it became 11 different products.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
3
okay.
years. I lost 60 pounds wearing a wire. People at work thought I had cancer. I was falling apart. I mean, basically, we're wearing a wire so long that the FBI would say, and there's a documentary on my website, markwhitacre.com, that kind of goes more into detail. The FBI would say, Mark, if these guys catch you, they're going to kill you.
But at that point, it's almost like it's going to be worse than what you guys would do to me. I'd rather you guys just finish me off and do whatever you're going to do than let these guys catch me.
Right. And I felt that multiple times.
Right.
So there's multiple times I said, surely you guys had enough. Surely. But it went on for 3 years.
Wow.
1992 to 1995.
Wow. So when everything, I mean, when did it all come to an end? When did they have enough to actually just say, okay, we've gotten all we need from you? And how did that play out?
Well, they still also wanted the video because they knew they were going up against some large company, number 56 on the Fortune 500. So they wanted videos also to share. So they had a green lamp that looked like it came from a yard sale, and it had a video camera in it. And I mean, the equipment 30 years ago is not near as sophisticated as it would be today, obviously.
Right.
So this video camera and the lamp, the FBI would be in the next room. I'd tell them where the meeting's going to take place, the price fixing meeting, and they would be in the next room, and they could control with a remote control controller the video camera and that lamp. So they would zoom in whoever was talking to make sure to capture that, well. Because they wanted to show a jury something, not just a jury to hear the audio tapes that I was making.
Right.
So that green lamp would be at like the Shangri-La in Singapore, for example, $1,000 night hotel, a nice room like this, and a green lamp looked like it came from a yard sale. Sitting as close as that corner, sitting 5 feet from us.
Right.
A couple weeks later, the same green lamp at the next price fixing meeting, same 11 guys, same 11 co-defendants at the Mandarin Hotel in Hong Kong. That green lamp was a few weeks later at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago.
So wait, you mean to tell me nobody ever noticed
Never.
that same lamp was sitting there?
2 or 3 times a month for 3 years, sitting 5 feet from them. And it showed me a couple things. One, it showed me that greed blinds you, that they saw the millions of dollars in their head that they were going to get in bonuses from the price fixing. They didn't see what was 5 feet from them.
Wow.
No matter what room, no matter what country, no matter what conference room, sitting 5 feet from them. And it also showed me that, thank God, that there wasn't a woman criminal among us. Because a woman criminal would have said, you know what, that green lamp is following us around the world. But it shows that greed blinds you.
No.
As an informant, it showed me
deep.
that firsthand.
And you're right. It does. It puts a lens on your eyes sometimes to where you don't see the things right in front of you because all you're focused on is what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to get in the end. Wow.
But it also showed me, Robert, this is when that trial, 7-week trial in Chicago happened, almost 30 people went to prison on this case. 4 people from ADM alone went to prison, myself and 3 other executives above me. But it also showed me this, that when they saw that green lamp come in that trial and they were showing the jury how they gathered the evidence, and all the co-defendants are hitting their head like, now they remember the green lamp. That it just showed how greed blinded them. That they saw it then because they remembered the lamp.
They remembered it now.
But when it was following them around those rooms, all they could see is the $1 million. It just showed that greed blinds you. It really does.
Wow.
It blinds you.
Wow. That's and you know what? You're so right, because even in certain areas where like I've looked at things from a lustful standpoint, how lust will blind you to certain things, how and they all kind of play into the same role of lust, greed,
these false idols.
Right.
False idols.
Right, because at that point you're spending so much time trusting that what I'm going to get out of this, the gratification I'm going to get out of this, what it's going to provide me momentarily or in the future, that you don't even pay attention to what's going on right in front of you, right
5 feet from you.
Right. Literally 5 feet from you.
From different countries all around the world. And they even had to get the things that changed the voltage, and they had to tell Interpol and to get the approval.
Wow.
So I mean, there was a lot of
you're right.
processes to get that green lamp, to take it from 110 to 220 voltage.
Right, and the different plugins and different
yes,
oh, wow.
all that was happening behind the scenes with the FBI and the embassies and Interpol, and it was a process to make that happen.
That's actually kind of mind blowing now. Wow.
3 years. I mean, I was literally 34, started wearing a wire, 37 when I finished. I mean, it was 1992 to 1995. I was falling apart. My wife would pull me off, Ginger would pull me off on her driveway, blowing leaves off with a gas leaf blower. Leaves off during a thunderstorm. It'd be 3 a.m. She'd pull me off the driveway, and I'd have my suit and tie on and the recorder still attached to my back with an athletic band.
Wow.
I mean, I was literally having a nervous breakdown.
So in all of this, I noticed that you said that there was a point where finally everybody went to trial, and you end up receiving time for this. And I guess a lot of us would probably assume that, okay, well, if you cooperated, if you did what you were supposed to do, if you spent 3 years, why would you have, of course, most people would think, well, why would you have gone to jail as well? I thought that you did your service, you did your duty in helping them accomplish this.
What you do when you cooperate, you get less time. I mean, significantly less time. I mean, the plea agreement that the FBI got for me was a deal of a lifetime, 6 months in federal prison, a Martha Stewart sentence. The other are going to go to prison for several years.
Right.
6 months. And I remember my lawyer called me in Chicago with the lawyer I had and said, Mark, they got you a deal of a lifetime, 6 months in federal prison. And Ginger looked at me. She said, Mark, let's sign this. This is a deal of a lifetime, 6 months. And I looked at Ginger, and I'll never forget this. And I said, and keep in mind, I'm not a Christian. This is an example of selfish leadership we're talking about.
Right.
Now. This is greed and pride. And I looked at Ginger. I said, Ginger, you're the reason I'm in this mess in the first place. I'm going to do the opposite you want me to do. I had to wear a wire for 3 years because of you, Ginger. And I ripped up that plea agreement in front of Ginger, fired the lawyer on the spot. Pride got in the way. Impulse reactions. I ripped up the plea agreement and fired the lawyer on the spot. Hired a whole group of lawyers. I mean, I had a lot of money during that time.
Right.
And I hired 11 lawyers during that time, and I fought the case for 3 years in the courts and got an 8.5-year sentence instead when I had a 6-month plea agreement.
Oh,
right in front of
no.
me. So by not taking responsibility, it was an 8.5 sentence instead. And I tell you, Robert, I was so depressed then. Then I realized all the mistakes that I had made in that journey. And I wrote a 17-page letter to Ginger, and I pulled my car in one of those garages, and I tried to kill myself. I could not imagine going to prison for 8.5 years when I had a 6-month plea agreement right in front of me. So I tried to take my own life, hospitalized for a month, treated for post-traumatic stress disorder, and some of the things that happen when you wear a wire for 3 years.
Right.
But I still had 8.5 years in prison to do.
Wow.
And I was at the end of myself. I was at the end of myself.
Man, and you know, it's crazy how sometimes we look at the where we're placed sometimes, as I call it. Sometimes we're put in isolation, we're put in the wilderness sometimes, to look back on some of the situations we've been through, to look back at how we, like you said, you know, there's a lamp sitting right here and I never noticed it. There was a possible blessing sitting right there, even in the midst of the fact that you didn't agree with it. But even in turning that down, it gave you more time to look at things from a standpoint of like, wow, now I'm going to have to sit down for, what did you say, 8 years, 9 years, eight and a half years to have to really sit back and think about everything that's happened. So I can say that there are a lot of men sometimes that find ourselves sitting in situations where we feel isolated, where we feel like we're in darkness, where we feel alone, where we feel like we've been left to fend for ourselves. And I can only imagine being sitting somewhere where I don't have the opportunity or the freedom to be able to just say, you know what, I'm going to take a drive. You know what, I'm going to go clear my air by taking a jog. What would you say that in the midst of sitting there for 8.5 years, what happened during that, as I would call it, journey or new journey that you were on now from one season to the next?
Well, for one, I mean, I was so depressed, I tried to take my own life. I mean, but that, trying to take my own life, when you think that, I really, at that point, I got the end of myself. Really did. I mean, totally broken by this point in my life.
Right.
And the judge gave me 7 months to get things in order, get back on my feet, and I was hospitalized. So the judge they were treating me for post-traumatic stress disorder at the hospital, and some of those things they said was because of wearing the wire for 3 years, and the FBI saying if these guys catch you, they're going to kill you. So
at that point,
I was a basket case really at that point. I mean, I really was. And someone read about this in the newspaper when I had 7 months to get back on my feet. And they read about the 6-month plea agreement, we throwing it away, and all these things that happened. And this guy named was Ian Howes, and he was CFO of a pharmaceutical company. I didn't know him, stranger, CFO of a pharmaceutical company. He read about it. And he was also part of a group called CBMC, Christian Businessmen Connection. And he read about this in the newspaper. And this is when newspapers were a lot more common now. Online.
Shut up at the end of your driveway every day.
Yeah, this is 95,
Right.
And he reached out to me, and I'll never forget this. Took him a while to even find me. And his wife, an attorney, had 5 young kids, school age and younger. And he reached out and he said, Mark, prison's going to be the beginning of your life, and you're going to find your true purpose in life with the journey you're ready to start. And I'm hearing this. It's the strangest thing in the world to hear. I'm a month from being out of the hospital trying to take my own life. 7 months before I have to show up for prison for 7.5 years. And I said, Ian, what do you mean to that? I'm about ready to go to prison for 8.5 years. How's this the beginning of my life? And he said, Mark, I want to tell you something. He said, I'm going to introduce you to Jesus. And this is a businessman, a CFO of a pharmaceutical company. And he said, I'm going to introduce you to Jesus, and I'm telling you, you're going to find your purpose in your life, in this journey. You can have hope. And I remember replying to Ian Howes. I remember saying, I said, Ian, my parents are Christians. They forced me to go to church. I went to church with my wife and kids. So I've already go to church. He said, Mark, I'm not talking about going to church. He said, I'm talking about having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. He said, I'm really talking about a transformation. I think I'm talking about something I don't believe you've experienced yet, based on what I've read and based on what I know.
Right.
And I said, well, I'm looking for hope. I'm hopeless and helpless. So I'm looking for anything you can do to help. I'm looking for.
Right.
And he had a study called Operation Timothy. It's a tool. It's really a Bible study. It introduces you to God and introduces you to Jesus. And this man, his wife an attorney, him CFO of a pharmaceutical company, 5 young children, he spent 5 or 6 hours a week with me. When I know he didn't have the time, but God put it on his heart to spend with me. 5 or 6 hours a week, going through this study, Operation Timothy, introduced me to God and introduced me to Jesus. And he did that for 7 months before I went to prison.
Wow.
Spent that kind of time with me.
Wow.
When I know he didn't have the time. And I tell you, I wouldn't say I did not become a Christian during that 7 months. But I'm he planted an important seed right after I attempted suicide, and it gave me some hope.
Right.
And then my second week in prison, I'm 2 weeks in prison now, and a man named Chuck Colson showed up. And Chuck Colson was the White House counsel under President Nixon, went to prison in the 70s. He read about me in the Washington Post, and he read that I went to Cornell, he went to Brown, both of us Ivy League schools. He went to college 7 years, became a lawyer, an attorney. I went 8 years and became a PhD biochemist. So both of us college a long time. And he was in his 30s, White House counsel in office next to the Oval Office in his 30s.
Oh, wow.
For President Nixon, White House counsel for President Nixon. By the time he's 40, he's $20 a month in prison.
Right.
And he's reading about me. I went to Cornell, similar to Brown, that I'm 32, divisional president of one of the biggest companies in the world, number 56 on the Fortune 500. I'm be 40 and would be in federal prison at $20 a month.
Right.
So he saw a lot of his story in my story, where he was caught up in the world. Maybe him a little bit more on the political side and me a little bit more on the corporate side, but both of us got caught up in the world.
Right.
And he reached out to me, showed up my second week in prison. God put on his heart to reach out. He was chairman and CEO of Prison Fellowship. He founded Prison Fellowship, the largest prison ministry in the world.
Okay, yeah.
And he showed up my second week in prison. I'll never forget this. And he started telling me the same thing that Ian Howes was telling me. And I told him that. I said, and I didn't even know, I mean, Watergate happened when I was in high school, so I knew President Nixon and Watergate, but I didn't even know who Chuck Colson was.
Right.
He's this real famous guy, and I didn't even know who he was when he showed up. And he said, Mark, you're going to find your purpose in life with really the junction you're at right now. And I said, well, Ian Howes has been telling me that for 7 months.
Right.
He's been discipling me 6 or 7 hours a week. And I said, I've learned about God, and I've learned about Jesus dying for my sins and how Jesus was resurrected. I've learned all that during what Ian Howes is sharing with me. And he said, Mark, if you become a Christian, have you surrendered your life to Jesus? And I said, I really haven't. And I said, here's where the block is, Chuck. I said, I got 8 years of college in the sciences. I've learned Big Bang Theory and evolution and everything about that there is no God. And I even had professors tell me, if you believe in God, you can't be a scientist, or if you believe in God, you can't be in my class. Right. I've learned that for 8 years. And he said that's exactly what he learned at Brown, just like I was learning at Cornell.
Oh, wow.
That's what he learned. He said he had the same block that I had. And I said, Chuck, how'd you get past that block? Because I want to believe what Ian Howes is sharing with me. But that's the thing that's the hurdle in my way from surrendering my life to Jesus. And I'll never forget, he said, Mark, he said, do you think there's a PhD scientist that believes in God? And I said, I don't think there is. I've never met one. I've never read about one. And he started sharing with me, discipling me and mentoring me. And he started sharing me article after article, Robert, that some of the best scientists in the world that believe in God. He showed me, the first thing he showed me was an article by Albert Einstein.
Right.
Where Albert Einstein had an article that only God could create man and only God could create the universe.
Oh, wow.
And I said, I never learned that when I was at Ohio State or Cornell.
I've never heard that before.
And he shared that with me. And then he shared a book with me that Sir Isaac Newton wrote as much about Jesus as he did about science. And I said, boy, they sure never talked about that at Cornell. And Francis Collins, who discovered the human genome, is a Christian. I said, I sure never learned that my 8 years in the sciences at Ohio State and Cornell. And then I never forget, he shared a book with me about 3 months mentoring me. He shared a book with me where the scientist named Don Byerly, Bierle, a scientist in Minnesota, his goal was to prove once and for all there is no God. And Jesus was just a man.
Right.
That's what he wanted to prove. And this man was obsessed with that and studied, a PhD biologist. So it was a language that I could understand, being a PhD biochemist. And this scientist spent almost 10 years of his life trying to prove that God did not exist and Jesus is not the Son of God. And he wrote this book titled Surprised by Faith. In this book, this scientist that was a critic and an atheist and tried to disprove God, he wrote a book after all his studies that God does exist and Jesus is the Son of God. And he wrote a book titled Surprised by Faith. And I finished that book, Robert. And when I finished that book in June of 98, a month after I turned 41 years of age, I'm only 3 months in prison, this scientist became a Christian after studying that for 10 years. And I finished that book and I thought, how can you be a PhD scientist and not believe in God?
Right.
How can you be a PhD scientist and not believe Jesus is the Son of God? I got down on my knees when I finished that book that day and gave my life to Jesus.
Wow.
The very day when I finished the book by Dr. Don Byerly, Surprised by Faith.
That's awesome.
I became a Christian that day.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, I thought it was impossible
Right.
not to not believe in God after I saw the scientific evidence that God does exist and Jesus is the Son of God. And I tell you today, as an Ivy League PhD scientist, that Jesus does exist and Jesus is the Son of God.
Right.
I have no doubt in my mind.
Right. So with all of that, how did your wife feel about you then making that decision to become a Christian in prison after reading that book?
I can remember my wife visited me every weekend and my children. And like I said, most marriages don't survive. The divorce rate when you go to prison is 78% divorce rate for someone to go to prison. Mm-hmm. It's 99% divorce rate if you serve 5 years and longer. And I served 8.5.
Wow.
So, I mean, we had less than a 1% chance. It just shows that God doesn't care about statistics.
Right.
Because we're married 43.
That's good.
It's a miracle of God. And I can remember her coming out that weekend, and she brings that up even when she shares her testimony at several different places when she shares, and when she shares with others, that was the first weekend when she came, and I'm 3 months in prison at that point. So in prison and even prior to that, I would blame the FBI. I would blame ADM. I always was pointing fingers and blaming everybody else. And that weekend, her and my children, 3 children, when they visited me, after I surrendered my life to Jesus, after I became a Christian,
right,
for the first time in a couple years, that I said I have no one to blame but myself.
Wow.
For the first time, I was taking full responsibility.
And
No one put a
acceptance
gun to my head and said, you have to be involved with price fixing.
Right.
Mark, you have to be involved with fraud. No one put a gun to my head. I was so obsessed with that lifestyle, I went in hook, line, and sinker and followed it.
And that's a huge thing, because acceptance and accountability is the start to growth, and that it takes us getting away from blaming everybody else and actually saying, you know what? This was my role in this. I am accountable, and I have to accept the fact that this is how I played in that, instead of pointing your finger at everybody else. I realize how important that is, because that is like a huge step in a journey to heal from what's happened.
Yeah. Step in the healing.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah.
Huge step. And every weekend thereafter, whenever we were talking about that, that accepting responsibility and said I had no one else to blame but myself,
right,
was a huge step forward.
Wow.
Huge step for my entire family. And
wow.
I think it was a step towards reconciliation with them.
Right.
It was.
Right.
Because they see that I took responsibility, and it was just a big step. It's one of God's steps moving forward in redemption and second chances and healing.
Right. No, that's awesome. Yeah. So now that you've taken that step, not only in accountability, but also taken that step to grow closer to God, what journey did that take you on now? Like, how did your life start to move at this point now in your journey being in prison 3 months in? Where did that take
8
you?
years yet to do.
Right.
8 years
Correct.
yet to do.
Yeah.
I tell you something, Robert. I became a free man in prison. The real prison was the life before I went to prison.
Oh,
that
wow.
life of greed and pride and feeling like more was going to fill that void.
Right.
You know, I had a Mercedes and 2 BMWs and a Ferrari and
oh, wow.
and it's really like it was never enough. It was never going to fill that void. There was nothing that I bought and nothing that I could buy that was going to fill that void.
Wow.
And now I'm in prison with God in my life after earning millions for 8 years.
Right.
Living in like Bon Jovi.
Right.
And now I'm in prison for $20 a month for 8 years. And that void was filled. I became a free man in prison. And I started thinking, I'm 3 months a Christian. Therefore I got 8 years yet to do.
Right.
From age 40 to 49 in prison.
Right.
And I started praying. I said, God, Chuck Colson and Ian Howe said I'm going to find my purpose in my life, but I got 8 years of prison to do. What is my purpose here?
Right.
In prison. And I started with the education I have. They put me in the education department. And I started helping inmates get their GEDs and learn how to read, learn how to write. The ones that spoke Spanish only, I helped them learn how to speak English and write English. And I can tell you, Robert, those 8 years in prison became the most productive years of my life.
Wow.
Because the first time in my life, I was helping somebody else besides myself. And I learned how rewarding that is. And I learned I learned how rewarding servant leadership is, because I'd never experienced it.
And okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that you found not only found God, but you found freedom in prison. And for a lot of people, they would probably say the exact opposite, in that, wow, I felt like I was set down, but I was at that point in my life, I was locked down. I couldn't do anything. Everything was up to somebody else. But you're telling me you found freedom, and that's remarkable, because as I sometimes would say, a lot of people find freedom. They realize that freedom's not in what they can do, but freedom is where their mind is, and what they're allowed to do based on how they feel and what the transformation they've gone through. Because it doesn't matter where you're at or what the circumstances around you look like. It's about how you view and can find gratitude in what's going on around you. So explain that further, in that how did you go from having millions, living like a rock star, as you said, Justin Bieber, to finding freedom and true happiness, making $20 a month in prison?
And I tell you, the reason is because I learned how rewarding it is to help somebody else, to help someone get their GEDs that were 8th grade dropout when they came to prison. And some of them even got 2-year degrees through correspondence, a 2-year college degree. And I was able to participate in assisting them, in helping them. And I'd never experienced that, helping somebody else. The bonuses that I received was based on the performance we had at ADM and growth and revenues.
It wasn't about you helping anybody else or serving anybody else. It was helping you.
Yeah, and the 3 people above me that mentoring me, they were selfish leaders. One of them was a billionaire, our CEO. And it was all about us and all about selfishness and rewarding ourselves. I never even experienced, even through mentorship, about helping someone else. And then I'm in prison, and I'm being mentored by Chuck Colson and Ian Howes, how rewarding it is to know God and to have God in your life. And then I'm serving others, helping them get their GEDs and helping them learn how to read and write. And I started taking them through the same Bible studies that Chuck Colson and Ian Howells were taking me through, and introduced them to God and introduced them to Jesus. So besides mentoring them to help them get their GEDs, I was also sharing the gospel and taking them through Bible study. And it was so rewarding. And it took me going to prison, and it took me being broken to learn that.
So, and that's crazy, because, it speaks to the fact that, there are so many so-called mentors and leaders out here, but you're telling me that at one time you were mentored and led by men who were teaching you how to line your pockets, how to grow financially, how to have what most people would dream to have. But in that, you found yourself in prison. But now you're telling me, based on the leadership that you had received from others, and now the leadership and the servant attitude that you had and that you approach others in the prison with, it brought you the freedom and the true happiness that and I believe you would say this earlier, that you were seeking in what you weren't finding in all the other things that you had obtained.
Yeah, it's basically, I was having mentors doing it God's way. And mentors that were about serving and servant leadership. Because the mentorship that I had from Chuck Colson and Ian Howells was, they didn't get paid to help me and mentor me, and God put that on their heart. Matter of fact, that took Ian Howells' time. He was CFO of a pharmaceutical company. That took his time.
Right.
It did. Away from his work.
Right.
But it was so rewarding, and God led him to do it. In the same way Chuck Colson, God led them to reach out to me and mentor me and disciple me. And the same mentorship that I was providing to others in prison, at $20 a month, you're not paid to do that.
Right.
But it was so rewarding. So besides introduce them to God and introduce them to Jesus and help them grow in their faith walk, I'd also help them get their GEDs, and some of them even get a 2-year college degrees. And it was so rewarding.
Wow.
It filled that void. Robert, I'm telling you, that void was filled at $20 a month that was not filled at millions of dollars a year for 8 years.
Wow.
That void was filled. And that void was God.
Wow.
That void in my heart that I saw that my wife had.
Right.
When she's driving a 10-year-old Jeep.
Right.
When I'm driving a Ferrari and had 8 cars like that. That void was God.
Wow.
In my heart. And I found that void that I kept saying, boy, there's got to be more to this, more than this. And that more was God.
Wow.
It wasn't money and it wasn't financial. Matter of fact, I'm $20 a month.
Right.
And that void was filled.
Right.
I became a free man in prison.
Wow. That's remarkable.
Before prison could never fill that void.
That's remarkable.
And it changed my life. It transformed my life. My whole life was turned upside down in a good way.
Right.
It changed my life forever.
And you know what? I think your story could even speak to men that aren't in prison, because sometimes we're in prisons to our mind. We're in prison to our lives. We're in prison to what we've been living and how we've been living. And sometimes we're looking for a way out. We're looking for something that will allow us to feel free, because we don't feel free with the way we're moving through life. And I'm not even talking about from a standpoint of making millions. Sometimes we could be doing well. We could be well off. But sometimes we definitely feel like we're missing something. I mean, we can feel it in our heart, like, I'm not getting anything from this. I don't feel fulfilled in any of this. I speak about that all the time. And we all feel like we're missing something. And I tell a lot of people sometimes, it's in your yes to serve others that a lot of you are missing a blessing, because it's in your yes to serve somebody else instead of serve yourself, that you will find a sense of, wow, that felt good. That felt way better than going out and seeking pleasures and other things sometimes. And so, no, that's awesome. So now you got to tell me the rest of the story. I mean, we're this far in. So how did everything play out as you continue to serve out the rest of your time?
What I learned in this journey, that the real prison that I was in was the prison to those false idols before I went to prison. The prison that At Cornell, they were saying you needed to have a big house and you needed to have a big title and you needed to have a lot of cars and toys and corporate jet.
Right.
That was the prison, the false idols.
Right.
What I learned in the journey was that living a life of significance is so much more rewarding than the life of success, the way the world defines success, which is titles and corporate and compensation and the kind of house you have.
Right.
A life of significance is serving others, and how rewarding that is. And that's what I learned in that journey. Prison was those false idols before I went to prison. The title and the house and
they locked you into a lifestyle that you had to keep up, and it made you continue on, and it gave you a false sense of fulfillment. It gave, based on what culture was telling you, you had made it.
It never filled that void. But that life never filled that void in my heart that I had. That I saw my wife, how she was so content, driving a 10-year-old Jeep in this house and cars, never met anything.
Wow.
Never met anything to her. And then I got it. That void being filled was Jesus. And Jesus using that void to serve others, to live a life of significance. And I helped during those 8 years I was in prison, many others get their GED, learn how to read, learn how to write, and also introducing lots of them to Jesus.
Wow.
And to God.
Right.
Some of the most productive years in my life were at $20 a month. Some of the most productive years of my life.
Wow.
So when I got out a couple decades ago,
right,
then I'm saying, boy, that was so rewarding. I need to continue that kind of life.
Right.
I was hired by a biotech company when I got out, starting like someone the level of college, like right out of college.
Okay.
And after several promotions, I became the COO of that company. But this time doing it God's way, not my way. Had a Christian CEO, California biotech company. Think about it, California biotech company, but a faith-based, God-honoring company. Boy, it was so rewarding, especially in California. It's so it's so different than what the norm is.
Right.
But it was servant leadership, and it was serving others. And a cancer research company, I found that so rewarding. I'm still on their advisory council today.
Nice.
And then I became the COO. I was COO of that company after a few promotions. And then I became the COO of CBMC, Christian Businessmen Connection, the very organization that reached out to me when they read about me in the newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
When I ripped up that 6-month sentence and attempted suicide.
Wow.
I became the COO of that for about 8 years.
Wow, that's crazy.
To help equip other leaders to do it God's way.
Yeah.
And for the last few years, I'm working with Coca-Cola Consolidated.
Right.
Leading T-Factor. Well, T stands for transformation. What's happened in my own life.
Right.
And T-Factor is where we help companies transform their cultures. T-Factor, the purpose of T-Factor is to transform workplace cultures around the world for good, for God, and for growth.
Wow, nice.
And to be a servant leadership oriented, purpose driven company like what Coca-Cola Consolidated is all about. But this time working for a large company, but not involved with price fixing and some of the things that I was involved with ADM, but doing it God's way, to honor God in all we do.
Nice.
I mean, what an opportunity that is to help equip leaders to transform their companies.
Wow.
We equip 300 companies per quarter to do it God's way, to be a purpose-driven company. And it's so exciting to be part of that.
Wow, and it's almost like it came back full circle in that now, instead of allowing others to lead the way that you were led at one time, now you're leading other companies to do it the way God would want to do it instead of the way you had originally done it. So it came back full circle, and that's remarkable. That's awesome. That is an awesome
it's
story.
helping them become a company like Coca-Cola Consolidated.
Yeah.
To honor God in all you do by serving others.
Right.
And pursuing excellence and growing profitably, but to do it God's way.
No,
to live a life of significance instead of that life of the way the world defines success.
Right.
So it's been, and I look back, Robert, and people ask common questions. They ask, well, what would have happened if you signed that 6-month sentence? My wife and I get asked that a lot.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
As my wife says, as she even said on CBMC National News in 2009 when the movie The Informant came out, as she said, my husband, looking back, would have came out the same greedy man that he went in prison with a 6-month sentence. God gave him exactly what he needed.
Wow.
I agree with it. I needed to be broken. I needed to get to the end of myself.
Right.
And I needed to transform my life. And it took 9 years of prison to do that.
Wow.
6 months, I would have never listened to a Chuck Colson or an Ian House with a 6-month sentence.
Because you know that you would have been getting out soon, and there was no need. You didn't need. Wow, that's so. That's good.
I would have never listened to him.
Right.
But with a 9-year sentence, you're at the end of yourself.
Right.
You're looking for hope.
Yeah.
And you listen.
Right.
And I learned from them and grew from them.
That's
with
awesome.
a 9-year sentence. And another unique thing that happened, the companies that were the victims of the price fixing case, like Tyson Foods and Mount Air, and they won hundreds of millions of dollars back from in class action suits. They gave my wife a whistleblower reward for forcing me to turn myself in, and they financed my wife and kids the 8.5 years I was in prison. The very people I stole from in the price fixing case took care of my family while I was in prison.
Wow, look at
for
God.
8.5 years. A miracle.
That's
of
that.
God.
Yeah. No, that's
my wife
awesome.
went back to school to be a teacher at age 40. She was teacher of the year of her whole city in 2007.
Oh, nice.
They put my kids through college.
Wow.
My daughter has a master's degree from Duke University. She's a school teacher, paid for by the companies that were the victims of the case. My youngest son has an MBA from Georgia Southern, paid for
That's
by the
awesome.
companies.
And it almost
God.
contributes to the fact that, you know, even when God is working on you, he'll still take care of your family. He'll still take care of those who trust him. And even in your wife knowing that she was going to shoot in her decision and y'all's decision, it was going to send you away, and she didn't know how she might even continue to be able to take care of things, even in trusting she was taken care of. That's awesome. That is awesome.
She thought maybe she'd have to go home and live with her mom.
Right.
With our 3 children.
Right.
But God took care of them.
That's awesome. That is awesome. That is an awesome story, man. I'm so glad I got to sit down with you and hear this, because this story is truly what a lot of us need to hear. I needed to hear this years ago. I you know, as we race to trying to find that perfect life, that life that we all desire, and we'll do it at all costs. Sometimes we'll know that we're maybe taking the wrong approach, and we'll know that we're doing things the wrong way, but yet we still look at what it may bring us in the long run. So no, this was awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time with me, Mark, and I really appreciate all my listeners that listened today, that got to enjoy this story. You know, this story is all of them are unique, in that they all speak to the fact that we all have gone through things. We're all going through things. We're all experiencing certain parts of our life where we may look at things from a standpoint of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how I'm going to tackle this, and maybe even have lost hope, as Mark brought up earlier in his story. But hopefully this encourages you to understand that even in the worst situations that you believe you can't walk away from, be encouraged to understand that God has never walked away from you, and what he's doing in your life, even when you think that, you know what, I might as well give up in this moment. He still has a plan for you, just like he had a plan for Mark, like he had a plan for me. You know, he definitely has a plan for your life. So I hope this encouraged you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Mark, you have any last words or anything final to say before we head out?
I would say this: no matter what trial or tribulation or adversity you're going through, think about it. At 40, when I'm about ready to go to prison for 8.5 years by me not accepting the 6-month plea agreement, I thought life was coming to an end, to the point where I tried to take my own life. I thought life was over. In reality, life was just beginning. As Ian Howells told me, I would find my purpose in my life, and my life was just about ready to begin. at age 40, that was reality.
Right.
So with the adversity that you're going through and the trials that you're going through, boy, I thank God for that brokenness today.
Right.
I thank God for that adversity today, because that molded me and really opened even bigger doors that are even more rewarding than the doors that I had during that time when I was in my 30s.
Right.
So I thank God for brokenness, and I thank God for adversity, because God
That's so
used it
deep.
all for good.
Right. Oh, that's good. That's really good. Well, awesome. Hey, I couldn't have said it any better. So, hey, I thank you for listening today. I appreciate your time, and hopefully you truly gleaned something from this. Hopefully it blessed you the way it's blessed me. Hey, you all be great. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, we appreciate you listening today and hope that if you enjoyed the conversation and stories, you will subscribe and listen to past and future content. Feel free to comment, as we would love to read your comments and pray over all of our listeners. Also, please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook at GodsGlory and Minstrel Stories.
We understand as men how the thought of even facing your own story and the pain and hurt that come with that is a challenging task. But we don't want you to feel like you are all alone, because you are not. God has not forgotten you or left your side, and He loves you no matter what you have done. Your healing is important to Him, and we want you to have these free resources that already exist if you're considering giving up or need someone to talk to. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is 1-800-273-8255. If you need support but are not in crisis, consider reaching out to a warm line if you need to talk to someone. Speaking to someone on these calls is typically free and confidential and run by people who understand what it's like to struggle with mental health. Find a local number by going to warmline.org.